She told the truth and lost everything. A young reporter exposed a deadly cover-up, only to be fired and blacklisted overnight. When she sits down for what she thinks is her final interview with Keanu Reeves, she has no idea he's about to change her life and turn her courage into a movement the world will never forget. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The hum of computers filled the air, blending with the rhythmic clacking of keyboards and the low murmur of newsroom chatter. Screens glowed across the open office, headlines flashing in bold fonts, breaking news alerts pinging every few seconds. In the middle of it all sat Emily Carter, her brown hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. The story she was finishing wasn't just another headline. It was the truth, raw, uncomfortable, and urgent. Her article detailed the collapse of a half-built luxury condominium in downtown Los Angeles, a tragedy that had killed 2 construction workers just 3 days earlier. The official statement from Horizon Developments called it a tragic accident caused by equipment malfunction, but Emily had spent nights tracking down witnesses, digging through inspection records, and speaking to the victims' families. What she found told a very different story. Safety violations had been ignored. Inspectors had been bribed. And the company, one of the city's largest developers, had silenced complaints for years. She read over the final lines again, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed the last words. The truth may be buried under concrete, but it cannot stay there forever. A notification popped up on her screen. Meeting with editor, 10 minutes. Emily sighed, saved her draft, and grabbed her notepad. She knew this conversation was coming. Every time she uncovered something big, management grew nervous. Truth, in the corporate world, was never welcome unless it served the right people. Her editor, Richard Graham, stood near his glass-walled office, pacing. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that had long ago forgotten empathy. As she approached, he gestured for her to close the door. "Emily," he began, his tone forced calm. "I read your piece." She waited, notebook in hand, ready to defend every fact. "And?" He sat down, rubbing his forehead. "It's good work. Too good. But it's too risky. Horizon Developments is one of our biggest advertisers. Legal already called me. They say you're making serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Emily replied. "They're documented facts. I have inspection records, eyewitnesses, and signed statements. If we don't publish this, we're part of the cover-up." Richard leaned back, exhaling through his plas nose. "You've got to stop treating this place like a crusade. This is a business, not a courtroom." Emily's voice hardened. 2 men died because corners were cut. Their families deserve the truth. He stood up now, crossing his arms. "And you deserve a paycheck. We can't run the story in this form. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to tone down the accusations. Focus on safety awareness. Generalize the company's involvement. The piece will still run, but cleaner. No names. No direct blame." Emily's stomach twisted. "You want me to write propaganda. I want you to keep your job," he snapped. Outside, the newsroom noise continued. Phones ringing, printers humming, the illusion of productivity covering the rot underneath. Inside that office, the tension thickened until Emily spoke again, quietly but firmly. "If we bend the truth every time money's involved, what's the point of journalism?" Richard's patience snapped. "Do you want to destroy your career over this?" The words hung in the air like a warning. Emily's jaw tightened. "If telling the truth destroys my career, maybe it's the career that's broken." She turned and left the office without waiting for his reply. The silence that followed her down the hallway was deafening. People glanced up from their desks as she passed. Some looked away quickly. Others gave her sympathetic smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Everyone knew what defiance cost here. When she reached her desk, she found an email waiting from HR. Please see us immediately. No explanation, no subject line. Just that single line, the prelude to execution. She closed her laptop slowly. The newsroom felt colder now, detached, as if it had already erased her from its memory. She took her press badge from around her neck, holding it in her hand for a long moment. It had once meant something: truth, purpose, belonging. Now, it just felt like a relic. As she walked toward the elevator, a storm gathered outside the tall glass windows. The first drops of rain tapped against the glass like whispers. She pressed the elevator button and waited, feeling the world tilt just slightly out of balance. The HR office was on the 14th floor. Sterile, quiet, lined with fake plants. Inside sat a young man in a suit who didn't meet her eyes. "Emily Carter," he said, shuffling papers. "We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Emily stood frozen. "Because I refuse to change my story?" He cleared his throat. "The official reason is insubordination and breach of editorial guidelines." "Insubordination," she repeated softly. "For telling the truth." He avoided eye contact. "You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay. Please return your badge." Her hand shook slightly as she handed it over. It was the only piece of identification she'd ever been proud to carry. The HR rep gave her a corporate smile that felt mechanical. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Emily walked out without a word. By the time she reached the lobby, the rain had turned into a downpour. The city outside blurred under streaks of gray. She stepped into it anyway. No umbrella, no plan. The cold drops soaked her blouse, plastered her hair against her face, but she didn't care. The badge still trembled in her fingers, its lanyard wet and limp. Standing under the gray sky, she whispered to herself, "What's the price of telling the truth in a world built on lies?" The wind carried no answer, only the sound of distant thunder, echoing like applause for a fight she hadn't meant to start. Emily wandered down the slick sidewalk, her heels clicking against puddles, blending with the wail of passing sirens. The city that once pulsed with ambition now felt alien, indifferent. Each step away from the newsroom felt heavier, as if her convictions were a weight she couldn't put down. She ducked beneath the awning of a closed bookstore, trembling from the cold and the shock. Her phone buzzed messages from colleagues she'd once trusted. "I'm so sorry. You did the right thing, but they're furious. Delete your files. They're covering it up." Emily's breath caught. She clutched her phone tighter, a tear slipping down her cheek. In the reflection of the rain-streaked window, she saw a woman she barely recognized, tired, soaked, but unbroken. Her mind replayed Richard's voice, sharp and dismissive. "This is a business, not a courtroom," she whispered bitterly. "And I guess the truth doesn't pay." A bus roared past, splashing muddy water at her feet. She didn't move. Somewhere inside her, something solidified, not anger, not pride, but quiet resolve. She'd lost her job, but not her voice. Not yet. Pulling her coat tighter, she began walking again, her badge still in hand. She stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into a trash bin. The plastic clattered softly against the metal, an ending sealed by rain. But even as the storm raged around her, a thought flickered in her mind like a spark refusing to die. If the truth cost her everything, maybe it was still worth the price. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere across town, another person, Keanu Reeves, was about to cross paths with that truth, and nothing would ever be the same. The storm eased as night fell, leaving the streets washed clean but empty. Emily found herself standing beneath the flickering sign of a small diner, drawn by the glow of its neon light. She slipped inside, dripping wet, and ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu. At the far corner, A television played muted headlines about politics and celebrity gossip noise pretending to be news. She watched with tired eyes, thinking of the two workers whose names would never trend, whose families would never see justice. The waitress, noticing her soaked clothes, quietly brought a towel without asking. That small act of kindness broke something inside Emily. For the first time that day, she let herself cry silent, exhausted tears that carried more truth than any article she'd ever written. When she finally left, the city was calm again. The rain had stopped, but its scent lingered in the air, clean and heavy. She took a deep breath, unaware that somewhere, destiny was already stitching her story into another's, a man known for silence and integrity, who would soon recognize in her the same stubborn light that guided his own life. Her story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Emily woke to silence. The usual buzz of emails, meeting reminders, and newsroom chatter had vanished from her phone. Her inbox, once filled with urgent requests, now sat empty, except for one unread message, a severance confirmation. It felt less like communication and more like a final erasure. She sat on the edge of her bed in her small downtown apartment, the city. Lights from last night replaced by gray daylight creeping through half-drawn curtains. The rain had stopped, but her world hadn't cleared. She reached for her laptop, opened a job board, and began scrolling through listings. Junior copywriter, assistant researcher, digital blogger. All of them wanted someone team-oriented and adaptable. She knew what that meant. Someone willing to compromise. Still, she applied. Dozens of applications, each one carefully written, her references trimmed to the few who might still answer her calls. By afternoon, rejection emails began to trickle in, polite and cold. Some didn't even bother pretending. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Others were blunt, not a good fit for our editorial tone. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall. Her framed journalism award hung slightly crooked above her desk. She remembered the night she'd received it, how proud her parents had been, how her colleagues had cheered. The photo from that night still lived on her phone. Emily in a black dress, smiling, holding the golden plaque under the newsroom lights. She opened it now, looking at her own younger face, as if trying to recognize the person she used to be. Outside, traffic horns blared. Life went on, indifferent to her downfall. She poured herself coffee that had long gone cold and took a sip anyway. The bitterness matched the taste of her situation. By evening, she walked to a nearby grocery store with the last few bills in her wallet. The cashier, a girl barely 20, recognized her. "Hey, didn't you used to be on Channel 7? She asked. Emily smiled weakly. "Something like that." The girl's eyes widened with sympathy. "Sorry. My mom said you were brave. She saw that article online before it got deleted." That comment lingered. Brave. The word felt too heavy for how small she felt. She thanked the girl, took her groceries, and stepped back into the chill air. The truth hadn't made her a hero. It had made her invisible. Back home, she opened her email again. One new message stood out. It was from a freelance magazine she'd once collaborated with, City Light Review. The subject line read, "Possible assignment." Her heart skipped. Maybe this was a chance to start over. She clicked it quickly. The editor, a man named Calvin Reed, wrote, "Emily, we're doing a feature on public figures known for integrity and humility. We need someone to interview Keanu Reeves. It's a small piece, but your writing style fits perfectly. Are you available this week?" Emily stared at the screen. Of all people, Keanu Reeves, the man she'd watched on the diner's television, calm and kind, living proof that good still existed somewhere. The irony stung. She had lost everything for standing up for truth, and now she was being asked to write about someone celebrated for being genuine. She hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then she typed a single line, "Yes, I'm available." Days passed, and the world around Emily seemed to move in slow motion. Her once busy phone now stayed silent, except for bill reminders and messages from her landlord. Rent was due in a week, and her savings were disappearing fast. Each time she checked her email for a reply from one of the jobs she had applied to, the only new message waiting was from automated systems reminding her to keep applying. She spent her evenings in the dim light of her small apartment, laptop open, scrolling through old photos. There she was at a charity gala, laughing beside coworkers who now pretended not to know her. Another picture showed her and her editor at an award dinner, his hand on her shoulder, both smiling for the camera. She stared at it for a long time before quietly deleting it. Her phone buzzed again, and she tapped the screen to life. A news alert popped up. Keanu Reeves donates another $2 million to children's hospitals. A photo showed him in a plain t-shirt, smiling shyly as a crowd of nurses applauded him. His expression was calm, genuine, so different from the arrogance she'd come to expect from people in power. She clicked on the video clip attached to the article. The reporter on screen said, when asked why he continues to give anonymously, Keanu simply said, "Because kindness shouldn't need a camera." Emily watched in silence. The words felt like a balm to her exhaustion. Somewhere, deep inside, she felt the faintest flicker of respect, something she hadn't felt toward anyone in weeks. That night, she took the subway downtown to clear her head. The city glowed through the train windows, billboards flashing, street performers playing saxophones, strangers scrolling endlessly through their screens. She thought of how quickly truth could vanish, drowned in noise and distraction. She got off at Pershing Square and walked the quiet streets, her reflection following her in the glass storefronts. She had spent her life chasing stories, giving voices to others. But now she was the one no one would listen to. Every editor she had known had either stopped returning her calls or sent polite excuses. "You're talented," they said, "but we can't risk controversy." When she reached her building again, she checked her phone. Still no response from Calvin Reed, the freelance editor who had offered her the Keanu piece. She sighed, placed the phone face down, and stared out her window at the dark skyline. She didn't know that the next morning, everything would change. At dawn, her phone finally buzzed with a new message. It was from Calvin. Keanu's team approved the interview. Tomorrow afternoon, Cafe Venezia on Melrose. Keep it personal, not political. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she read the email. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "A story about humility. Maybe that's exactly what I need." The next morning, sunlight streamed through Emily's apartment for the first time in weeks. She stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her faded white blouse. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, her eyes were tired, but beneath the exhaustion was a quiet strength she hadn't seen before. This interview felt like more than a job. It was a chance to prove to herself she wasn't finished yet. She took the bus instead of a cab, saving the last of her money. The ride through Los Angeles was slow, filled with the hum of early traffic and the chatter of strangers. Out the window, she watched the city that had once celebrated her turn its face away. Billboards for luxury condos towered above sidewalks lined with tents. The contrast stung. It was the same world she'd tried to expose. When she arrived at the small office of City Light Review, Calvin greeted her warmly. He was younger than she remembered, with messy hair and a kind expression. "You ready for this?" he asked. Emily managed a half smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." He handed her a press folder with Keanu's background notes, charity work, quiet donations, interviews where he avoided fame. They said no entourage, no formal setup. He prefers to meet in quiet places. Cafe Venezia, 3 o'clock sharp. She nodded, glancing through the file. "Why me?" Calvin shrugged. "You write with sincerity. And honestly, I think you could use a win." That small kindness almost undid her composure. For weeks, she had been invisible. Now, someone was giving her a chance to tell a story again, even if it wasn't her own. Back at home, she printed her notes and packed her recorder. She tried to rehearse questions aloud but kept stumbling. How do you interview a man known for humility when your own world has fallen apart? She decided she wouldn't pretend. If there was one thing she still had left, it was honesty. By late afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the clock. The sun dipped low, painting the walls gold. Her phone buzzed once more, a text from Calvin. He confirmed. Be on time. He likes sincerity, not polish. Emily exhaled slowly. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been punished for telling the truth, and now she was about to interview someone who had built his reputation on it. She grabbed her notebook and slipped it into her bag. On the first page, she wrote one sentence. What makes someone keep believing in good when the world gives them every reason not to? Then she looked out her window, watching the light fade over the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Keanu Reeves was preparing for the same meeting, unaware that the woman he was about to sit across from had already lost everything for the very thing he stood for. Tomorrow, their stories would collide. And for Emily, it wouldn't just be an interview. It would be the first breath of something new. The soft hum of espresso machines filled the small cafe, blending with the gentle clatter of cups and the low murmur of quiet conversation. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries, sunlight filtering through the window blinds in pale stripes that stretched across the wooden tables. Cafe Venezia was tucked away on Melrose, a place that seemed to exist outside the noise of Los Angeles, a sanctuary where time slowed down just enough for people to remember how to breathe. Emily pushed the door open, the small bell above it chiming softly. Her palms were damp. She had rehearsed the introduction a dozen times, but now that she was here, the words felt foreign. She scanned the cafe and froze when she saw him sitting near the corner by the window, his black jacket folded neatly over the chair, a cup of coffee in his hands. Keanu Reeves. He looked exactly as people described him. Calm, almost meditative. There was no entourage, no noise around him. Just presence. The kind that filled a room quietly instead of commanding it. He glanced up as she approached, offering a small, genuine smile that instantly disarmed her. Emily Carter? He asked. She nodded, clutching her recorder nervously. Yes, thank you for meeting me here. I wasn't sure if this place was right for an interview. Keanu gestured toward the empty chair opposite him. It's perfect. I like places that feel human. Emily sat, setting her notebook and recorder on the table. The recorder was old, one corner chipped from years of use. As she pressed the power button, the red light flickered and died. She tried again. Nothing. Her stomach sank. Keanu leaned forward slightly, noticing her panic. Take your time, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. His tone wasn't rehearsed or performative. It was the kind of reassurance that felt real, like he meant it. She took a breath, shaking the device gently until the light came back on. There, she said, managing a small laugh. I guess it still has some fight left in it. Sounds like its owner, Keanu said with a faint grin. Emily looked up, caught off guard. She hadn't expected him to be so perceptive or kind. Thank you, she said quietly, though she wasn't sure whether it was for the compliment or the patience. The first few minutes followed the structure she'd planned. Questions about his career, his philanthropy, his outlook on fame. Keanu answered with humility, each response thoughtful, but never boastful. When she asked about his donations to hospitals, he simply said, if something good happens to me, I like to pass it on. That's all. But as she looked at him across the table, she felt something shift. It wasn't the typical celebrity interview rhythm. There was no barrier, no performance. His eyes, dark and steady, carried an empathy that made it hard to hide behind professionalism. Keanu sipped his coffee, studying her for a quiet moment. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You don't seem okay. Are you still in love with journalism?" The question hit like a whisper of thunder, gentle, but impossible to ignore. Emily froze, her hand stilled on the notebook. What do you mean?" He smiled slightly. "You ask questions with precision, but your eyes look tired, like you're not sure if you still believe in what you're doing." For a moment, she wanted to deflect, to laugh it off and steer back to the interview. But the truth pressed at her chest like a weight she'd been carrying too long. The recorder's red light blinked between them, the only sound aside from the hiss of the coffee machine. She finally said, "It's complicated." Keanu nodded, not pushing. "Complicated's okay." Emily looked down at her notes but couldn't focus on the words anymore. "I used to love it. I believed stories could change things. Then I learned that honesty isn't always wanted. Sometimes it gets you fired." He leaned back, listening without interrupting. Her voice grew softer. "I wrote something that exposed the truth about a company after 2 men died because of negligence. My editor told me to rewrite it to protect sponsors. I refused, so they called me uncooperative and blacklisted me. Now no one will hire me." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Sorry, I didn't mean to say all that. You're here to talk about your work, not mine." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No need to apologize. You did the right thing." His tone was so calm, so sure, that it startled her. He continued, "It's rare to meet someone who doesn't bend for convenience. You probably feel alone right now, but what you did, it matters, even if it doesn't pay rent." Emily's eyes glistened. No one had said that to her since she'd lost her job. Not once. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to look away, pretending to jot down a note. But Keanu noticed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was understanding, the kind that forms between two people who recognize the same kind of pain in each other's lives. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the cafe faded into the background. Keanu watched her carefully, not with pity, but with quiet recognition. It was as though he'd seen that same weariness before in himself, perhaps, or in someone he once cared about. Emily cleared her throat and tried to bring the conversation back to neutral ground. "You've had your share of headlines too. How do you deal with people twisting your words or turning your kindness into stories that sell?" Keanu smiled faintly. "You stop chasing what you can't control. People will say what they need to fill their own silence. The trick is to make peace with the fact that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stays." His words settled over her like warmth. She took a deep breath, finally lowering her guard a little. "That sounds freeing. I used to think truth had to be loud to be heard." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Sometimes it's the quiet ones that last." Emily wrote that down without realizing it. Her pen moved automatically, like her heart knew this moment would matter later. A waitress approached, refilling their cups. Emily thanked her, then turned back to Keanu. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Of course. Why do you keep giving? The hospitals, the scholarships, all of it, you never take credit. Most people in your position would turn it into a brand." Keanu hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because kindness isn't a strategy, it's survival. I've seen what the absence of it does to people." His tone was calm, but there was pain beneath it, something unspoken. Emily sensed it instantly. "Someone close to you?" He nodded slightly, his gaze distant. "A few people, but I don't talk about that much. I just try to honor them quietly." Emily realized then that behind the fame and the headlines, there was a man carrying his own invisible weight. The kind that didn't demand sympathy, only understanding. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I think we're both a little broken, Mr. Reeves. But maybe that's what makes people like us notice things others don't." He smiled again, but this time It reached his eyes. Maybe broken isn't the right word. Maybe it just means you've felt deeply enough to see clearly. Her chest tightened at the honesty of it. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a failure. She felt seen. As the conversation flowed, the formality of the interview dissolved completely. They talked about purpose, about what it meant to hold on to decency in a cynical world. At some point, the recorder's red light blinked out again, but neither of them noticed. The real story wasn't being captured on tape. It was unfolding between them, quietly and sincerely. Across a table lined with empty coffee cups and the faint glow of afternoon sunlight. When they finally stood to leave, Emily realized something profound. The man she'd come to interview had somehow interviewed her instead. As they stepped outside, the light had softened into a golden haze. Emily thanked him, unsure how to express what the afternoon had meant. Keanu smiled and said quietly, "You did the right thing." That's rare. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words pierced through the doubt that had haunted her for weeks. He walked away toward his motorcycle, simple and unhurried, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with a recorder that had stopped working, but a heart that had started again. For the first time since losing everything, Emily felt hope return. The late afternoon sun burned softly against the horizon as Keanu slipped on his leather jacket and stepped outside the cafe. The street buzzed with traffic, but his thoughts were quiet, echoing with the sound of Emily's voice from just an hour ago. There had been something unmistakably real about her, something rare in a city built on illusions. He climbed onto his old black motorcycle, the same one he had kept for over a decade. It was scratched in places, but reliable, like the man who rode it. He turned the key, and the low hum of the engine rumbled through the air. As he eased into the traffic, the city stretched out before him, its lights flickering awake beneath the evening sky. The ride through the Hollywood Hills was his favorite kind of therapy. The winding roads curved like quiet thoughts, giving him space to breathe. The cool air brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of pine and asphalt. He thought about Emily's trembling voice when she confessed that she'd been fired for telling the truth. There had been no bitterness in her words, only exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting alone for too long. He could still see her eyes across the cafe table, steady yet broken, tired, yet defiant. That kind of spirit reminded him of his younger self, back when the tabloids had twisted his grief into gossip. They had printed lies about his private life, speculated about his losses, painted him as a recluse because he refused to perform his pain for the cameras. He remembered the first time he saw his mother's picture on the front page beside a fabricated quote, the article claiming she had spoken about her son's secret fortune. She hadn't spoken to any journalist. She had cried for days. The memory tightened something in his chest. Over the years, Keanu had learned that the truth didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered through those who refused to bend. People like Emily Carter. As he climbed higher into the hills, the city lights below shimmered like stars that had fallen and decided to stay. He pulled to the side of the road, switched off the engine, and sat in stillness for a moment. The only sound was the wind brushing through the canyon. He thought about what she had said, how she'd been labeled uncooperative for standing her ground. He'd met many people who claimed to value honesty, but few who were willing to lose everything for it. That kind of courage didn't need saving. It needed amplifying. The idea began forming quietly, like a spark that refused to go out. What if people like her had a place where the truth wasn't filtered, where integrity wasn't punished but celebrated? What if honesty had its own platform, free from sponsorships and manipulation? He started his bike again, the hum steady and grounding. The thought lingered as he rode down into the valley, the kind of thought that grows into action. That night, Keanu returned home to his modest house in the Hollywood Hills. The driveway lights flickered on as he parked the motorcycle and removed his helmet. The quiet that followed was familiar, comforting even. Inside, the living room glowed with the warm light of a single lamp. He dropped his keys on the counter, kicked off his boots, and sank into the couch with a heavy sigh. The city outside was still alive, but his world was still. He turned on his old laptop, the one he used for personal projects, and typed Emily's name into the search bar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, headlines appeared. Investigative reporter uncovers safety negligence in downtown collapse. Emily Carter, the journalist who wouldn't be silenced, fired for truth. The cost of integrity in modern media. He clicked on the first one. The article was buried deep within a local archive, but it was still there, factual, compassionate, unapologetic. Her writing was clear and unflinching, yet filled with empathy. She didn't exploit tragedy. She humanized it. The piece included quotes from workers, grieving families, and city officials. Every sentence carried weight, like it was written by someone who didn't just report news but lived it. Keanu leaned back, reading, line after line until the words blurred. He could almost hear her voice again, the tremor beneath her professionalism, the quiet fire that came through even when she tried to hide it. He searched further and found her older pieces, small-town investigations about unfair wages, housing issues, community heroes who went unnoticed. None of them had the polish of major media, but they had something better: heart. He smiled faintly. She reminded him of people he'd met throughout his career: grips, camera operators, set workers, the ones who never made headlines but made everything work. Honest people who didn't chase applause. His phone buzzed with a late-night message from his manager, Stephen Marks. Tomorrow's meeting with the studio has been moved to 9 a.m. Confirm? Keanu stared at the screen before typing back. Confirm. Also, I want to discuss a side project. Stephen responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Keanu turned off the phone and went back to reading. It was nearly midnight when he reached Emily's last published story, an editorial titled, "Why Truth Matters When Nobody's Watching." He read the closing paragraph twice. We can't fix a world that rewards lies until we start rewarding honesty. Even if the truth costs us everything, the silence costs more. He sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The words felt heavier than ink. He'd spent years giving quietly, believing that small acts were enough. But now, something deeper stirred in him, a conviction that maybe he could do more than donate. Maybe he could help restore faith in the very thing that had betrayed her. As the clock struck midnight, he closed his laptop, the decision already forming in his heart. Tomorrow he would start building something new. Morning came softly over the city. Sunlight spilled through the blinds as Keanu poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, overlooking the quiet hills. The world below moved at its usual pace: cars, dog, walkers. A mail truck turning the corner, but his mind was already miles ahead. He thought again of Emily sitting across from him, eyes weary but unbroken. Her courage had left a mark, one he couldn't ignore. He had seen plenty of actors play heroes on screen, yet very few people in real life showed that kind of moral clarity. She had done something most people wouldn't dare. She had chosen truth over comfort. He set down his cup and picked up his phone, scrolling to Stephen's number. The line rang twice before his manager answered. Voice groggy. "Morning, Keanu. You're up early. What's going on?" Keanu hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I want to start something new. Not a film, not a foundation, something different." Stephen paused. "Different how?" "I met someone yesterday," Keanu said. "A journalist. She lost everything because she refused to lie in her story, and I can't stop thinking about it." He walked across the living room, the sound of his boots soft against the wood floor. "I've been donating for years, but that's not enough anymore. Money helps people survive. Truth helps them live with themselves. I want to build a place for that." Stephen sat in silence on the other end. "You're talking about media?" "Independent media," Keanu clarified. "Something honest. Something that doesn't belong to advertisers or networks. A space where people like her can speak freely." "You know that's a big move. You'll be walking into a storm if you take on the media industry." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe the storm's overdue." There was a long pause before Stephen said, "Okay, tell me what you need. I'll send you details later." Keanu replied, "For now, I just need to know what it would take to get something like that off the ground legally, structurally. No investors, no publicity. Quiet start." "Got it," Stephen said, his tone shifting from concern to commitment. "I'll make a few calls." After hanging up, Keanu sat back on the couch, letting the quiet settle again. He wasn't sure what shape this idea would take, but he knew one thing, but he couldn't ignore it. On the table, his laptop still sat open to Emily's article. He glanced at her byline one last time. There was something poetic about it. The woman who had lost her voice might soon help others find theirs. He closed the laptop gently, then grabbed his helmet and keys. As he walked out to his bike, the sunlight caught the chrome just right, gleaming like a promise waiting to be kept. When the engine roared to life, he whispered to himself, "Truth shouldn't need permission." The sound of the motorcycle faded into the morning air, carrying with it the beginning of something that would soon change both their lives forever. The days that followed blurred together in slow, colorless rhythm. Morning light crept across Emily's apartment, landing on stacks of unopened mail, unpaid bills, and a laptop glowing with rejection emails. Every day began the same way coffee gone cold before it was finished. Job applications sent into silence. Hope stretched thinner than her patience. Her fingers tapped at her keyboard as she filled out another internship form for a small radio station in Pasadena. The pay was almost nothing, but she didn't care anymore. She just needed to belong somewhere again. She wrote out her experience, trimmed her resume, adjusted the tone to sound less difficult. When she hit submit, she already knew what would happen next. By noon, she'd received the same polite rejection. "We appreciate your interest, but we've chosen to move forward with other candidates." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen until her vision blurred. Her heart ached in a dull, familiar rhythm. It wasn't just about losing her job. It was losing her purpose, her identity, her reason to wake up in the morning. The world had kept moving, and she had been left behind. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya, her closest friend and an independent photojournalist who'd been with her since college. "Lunch? My treat. Don't say no." Emily smiled faintly and typed back, "Fine, but only if it's cheap." An hour later, they sat in a small taco shop, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Maya, with her messy bun and camera strap slung over her shoulder, looked like someone who hadn't stopped running since graduation. She studied Emily with concern. "You've got to stop torturing yourself," Maya said between bites. "It's been months. You can't fight the system alone." Emily stirred her drink absently. "Maybe not. But if I stop caring, then they win." Maya sighed, her tone softening. "Care of yourself. That's not defeat, it's survival." Emily shook her head. "It doesn't feel like survival. It feels like erasing everything I stood for." Maya leaned forward. "I admire what you did. Everyone does. But the world doesn't reward integrity. It punishes it. You have to play the long game, Em." Emily looked out the window. Cars rushed by. People hustled past the glass, the world completely unaware of her battle. "I thought the long game was telling the truth," she whispered. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them said, what words couldn't, that maybe there was no easy way back. When they finally left, Maya hugged her tightly. "Promise me you'll stop beating yourself up." "I'll try," Emily said. But even as she said it, she knew she wouldn't. That night, As she walked home, the neon lights of the city reflected off the puddles from a brief afternoon rain. Her phone was silent again. The only voice she kept hearing was Keanu's soft, steady, and unshakably kind. "You did the right thing." That's rare. Those words haunted her, but they also kept her alive. Emily spent the following week in quiet motion. Every morning began with determination, and every night ended in defeat. Her savings dwindled faster than she could adjust to the idea of losing them. The small comforts she once overlooked, fresh groceries, a cab ride, even a working coffee maker, were luxuries now. Each day brought new reminders of how far she had fallen. Old colleagues posted promotions on social media, celebrating new titles and exciting partnerships. The same people who once admired her integrity now thrived by keeping their heads down. It wasn't bitterness she felt, it was emptiness, a hollow ache where her ambition used to live. Her landlord slipped another late notice under her door that Thursday morning. She read it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the pile of others on her counter. She couldn't bear to throw them away. It felt like erasing accountability. She wasn't running from her life. She just didn't know where it was anymore. When she opened her laptop to check emails, there was nothing new. She opened her portfolio website out of habit, scrolling through her old work. One story in particular caught her attention, a photo of her standing with the victims' families after the Horizon collapse. The smiles on their faces were fragile, but genuine. That day had meant something. She whispered to herself, "It still matters." By afternoon, she decided to sell her camera. It had been her most valuable possession, both financially and emotionally. The thought broke her heart, but rent was due in 3 days. She found a small camera shop downtown that bought used equipment. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, examined it carefully. "Good condition. I can give you $500 for it." She hesitated. "It's worth more." He nodded. "I know, but I can only pay what I can resell it for. You okay letting it go?" Emily smiled faintly. "It's just a camera." But as she handed it over, her throat tightened. It wasn't just a camera, it was her witness to truth, the lens through which she'd seen the world clearly. Without it, she felt one step further from who she was meant to be. She left the shop with an envelope of cash and a strange lightness that didn't feel like relief. The city felt louder now, the people rushing past her as if she were invisible. She caught her reflection in a storefront window, tired, older, but still standing. That night, she made a small dinner, paid part of her rent, and sat on the floor of her living room surrounded by quiet. Outside, rain began again, soft but steady. It was the kind of night that made loneliness echo louder. She turned off the lights, wrapped herself in a blanket, and stared at the ceiling. Her mind replayed her last conversation with Keanu, the warmth in his voice, the certainty in his words. "You did the right thing." She whispered into the dark, "Then why does it feel like I lost everything?" The next morning arrived gray and heavy. Emily stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sirens outside her window. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed, as if her story hadn't vanished into silence. She finally rose, made herself instant coffee, and sat by the window with her notebook open. Writing had always been her way to make sense of chaos, but now the pages stayed blank. By evening, she decided to walk just to feel something again. The air was damp from the drizzle that had followed her all week. She passed by the cafe, where she'd first met Keanu. For a moment, she paused at the window, her reflection merging with the memory of his calm smile. She thought about how easily he had listened, how he hadn't tried to fix her pain, just acknowledged it. It had been a small act of grace, but it lingered. When she got back to her building, the hallway lights flickered. Something white lay on the floor near her apartment door, an envelope. She frowned, looking around, but no one was there. It was unmarked, except for a small embossed symbol on the corner, a stylized letter V shaped like a quill. She turned it over. No return address. Curiosity warred with caution as she tore it open. Inside was a single black card printed on thick paper. The text was simple, elegant. You are invited to a private industry event. Voice of Truth Media, Los Angeles. Saturday, 7 p.m. Dress code, professional. Beneath it was one handwritten line. Sometimes the story finds you back. Emily read it twice, her heartbeat quickening. The name, Voice of Truth, sent a chill down her spine. She had never heard of the organization, but something about it felt deliberate, personal. She looked again at the quill-shaped emblem, tracing its outline with her thumb. Was it a trap? A cruel prank from someone who knew her past? Or something else entirely? She placed the card on her kitchen table, poured herself another coffee, and sat staring at it for nearly an hour. Every instinct told her to ignore it, to protect what little was left of her peace. But deep down, another voice whispered the same voice that had once driven her to uncover lies, to fight for truth, even when it cost her everything. Maybe this was the universe giving her one more chance. When the clock struck midnight, she finally stood, tucked the invitation into her notebook, and whispered, "All right, let's see where this leads." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The city lights flickered like a promise waiting to be revealed. The night air was cool as Emily stepped out of the rideshare and stared at the address on her phone. It led her to an old industrial district she didn't recognize, rows of converted warehouses with dim lights glowing from high windows. She hesitated, clutching the black invitation card. The words, Voice of Truth Media, shimmered faintly under the street lamp. The ink, metallic and deliberate. She followed the sound of soft music and chatter coming from a building with a single open door. Inside, the warehouse had been completely transformed. Exposed brick walls framed long tables draped in white linen decorated with candles and greenery. The space buzzed with a quiet sort of energy, dozens of people in conversation, their voices hushed but animated, like they were sharing secrets rather than networking. Emily recognized the type instantly. Journalists, documentary filmmakers, photographers, activists, people who looked worn by purpose rather than fame. She walked deeper into the crowd, still unsure if she belonged. A woman with a name tag smiled at her. "Welcome," she said. "You must be on the guest list. Can I have your name?" "Emily Carter," she replied hesitantly. The woman checked a tablet, then smiled wider. "You're expected. Please, enjoy the evening." Expected? The word lingered in Emily's mind as she took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. Who would be expecting her at an event she hadn't known existed until last night? She wandered along the edges of the crowd, listening. Conversations floated around her discussions about censorship, corporate influence, and the erosion of trust in journalism. One man mentioned he'd been fired for refusing to promote a political ad. Another woman spoke about losing her grant after publishing an unapproved story about local corruption. Every story sounded familiar. Every voice carried the same tone of exhaustion she had once heard in her own. At the far end of the room stood a small stage. A single microphone waited under a warm spotlight, flanked by two simple banners bearing the same quill-shaped V she had seen on the invitation. The music faded. The crowd's murmurs softened. A host walked to the microphone and introduced the evening as a gathering of truth-tellers, people who refused to compromise integrity for comfort. Emily's pulse quickened. Something about the phrasing struck her deeply. The host continued, "Tonight, we honor not just stories, but the courage behind them. And we're joined by someone who believes the same values that built this room can still build the world." She barely noticed the crowd parting until she saw him, Keanu Reeves, walking toward the stage. The room fell silent. No fanfare, no dramatic entrance, just calm presence. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, his long hair falling loosely at his shoulders. As he reached the microphone, he paused, letting the silence breathe. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "Stories can heal or harm," he said. "The choice belongs to the teller." The words rippled through the room. Emily felt her breath catch. Keanu's voice carried through the vast space with a calm authority that made every word feel personal. "We live in a time," he said, "when information travels faster than reflection. People share before they think, react before they understand, and believe before they question. Somewhere along the way, truth became a product instead of a principle. No one moved. Even the waitstaff stood still. His tone wasn't rehearsed, it was grounded, quiet. But it carried the weight of conviction. "I've seen what lies can do," he continued. "They destroy reputations, families, even hope. But I've also seen what honesty can build. It may not make headlines, but it restores something much more important: trust." Emily stood frozen among the crowd, her glass untouched. Each word struck closer than she expected, as if he were speaking directly to her. Around her, heads nodded, and a few people whispered in awe. Keanu looked out over the room, scanning the faces with deliberate care, and for a brief second, his eyes found hers. The connection was instant, a spark of recognition that made her heart skip. He looked away only to continue. "The people in this room represent what's still good about storytelling. You remind the world that integrity doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs courage." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing. The sound echoed off the high walls. Keanu waited until it faded, then gestured toward a black curtain at the side of the stage. "And that's why tonight, we're launching something new. Something built for those who refuse to bend the truth for profit. It's called Voice of Truth, a collective for journalists, filmmakers, and creators who still believe that honesty is worth protecting." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked, though most attendees didn't seem to care about capturing the moment, they cared about witnessing it. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she held her glass tighter. Keanu continued, "This isn't about me. It's about creating a space where truth can breathe again, where people like you can work without compromise. No sponsors, no corporate control, just pure, transparent storytelling. We'll fund it independently, one story at a time." The crowd erupted again, this time louder, applause filling the entire warehouse. People looked at one another with renewed hope, the kind that's rare in a world built on cynicism. Emily could barely process what she was hearing. The words "voice of truth" repeated in her mind. It couldn't be coincidence. The invitation, the symbol, the name, it was all connected. Her chest tightened with realization, her mind flashing back to that afternoon in the cafe when he'd told her she'd done the right thing. Now, standing beneath the soft lights, she understood. This wasn't just another project. This was his answer to her pain, and he had built it with her in mind. The applause slowly faded, replaced by a quiet hum of whispered excitement. Keanu stepped down from the stage, shaking hands and exchanging a few words with the people nearest to him. The crowd began to mingle again, energized by what they had just heard. Emily stood still, watching him from across the room, unsure whether to approach or stay hidden in the background. Someone touched her shoulder. It was the same woman from the entrance who had greeted her earlier. "You're Emily Carter, right?" Emily nodded cautiously. The woman smiled. "Mr. Reeves would like a word, if you're available." Her breath caught. "With me?" The woman's smile deepened. "Yes, he said you'd understand why." Emily followed her through the small crowd toward a quiet corner of the warehouse, where the lights were softer and the noise faded into a low murmur. Keanu stood there, speaking to a small group of journalists. When he saw her approach, his expression warmed instantly. "Emily," he said, stepping forward, his tone both kind and familiar. "I'm glad you came." For a moment, she couldn't find Words. You invited me? He nodded. I thought you might be curious. Her mind raced. You started this? He looked around the room briefly before meeting her gaze again. It started the day you told me your story. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about what it costs to tell the truth. I realized I could do more than just listen. Emily swallowed hard. I thought that interview was just a job. I didn't know it would lead to this. Keanu's smile was small but steady. Neither did I. Sometimes the right story finds its way to the right person at the right time. She glanced around at the people faces filled with renewed purpose and whispered, You really did this. For people like me. For people like us, he corrected gently. You're part of this now, whether you realize it or not. Tears pricked her eyes. I don't even have a camera anymore, she said softly. I sold it to pay rent. Keanu tilted his. Ed. Then we'll get you another one. The simplicity of his answer hit her harder than any speech could. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering belief. He turned toward the crowd again and said quietly, The world will always move fast, but truth doesn't have to chase it. It just has to stand still long enough to be seen. Emily felt something shift inside her. A quiet, steady spark that had nearly gone out, now flickered back to life. As the night carried on, she looked up at the banners hanging high above the stage, each bearing the emblem of the quill-shaped V. Beneath it, in small print, were the words, Integrity over influence. For the first time in a long while, she smiled without forcing it. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but standing there among strangers who believed in the same impossible dream, she felt her purpose return. And when Keanu looked her way one last time, that same calm smile crossing his face, she finally understood none of this was coincidence. It was faith finding its way home. The event was winding down, but the air still vibrated with a quiet electricity. Conversations hummed in corners, hands shook, and promises were exchanged between people who had all but lost hope hours earlier. The banners of Voice of Truth fluttered gently from the ceiling vents, as if alive with new purpose. Emily lingered near the back, unsure of where to stand. Her heart was still racing from the moment Keanu had spoken to her earlier. She had wanted to say something more, something that could capture what this meant to her, but words felt inadequate. Then she saw him again. Keanu was making his way toward her, moving slowly through the dispersing crowd. He greeted people along the way. No red carpet charisma, no spotlight gestures, just quiet gratitude for each person who stopped him. When he reached her, she felt her breath catch. The noise of the room seemed to fade around them. I was hoping we'd get a moment to talk, Keanu said, his voice low, steady. Emily tried to smile, though her nerves betrayed her. I still don't understand any of this. Why me? He looked at her for a moment, as though weighing the question carefully. Because when you told me what happened, I couldn't stop thinking about it. You reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that truth needs allies, not audiences. Emily blinked back sudden tears. All I did was tell a story. Keanu shook his head. You did more than that. You refused to let it be rewritten. Most people don't do that anymore. The honesty in his words left her unmoored. She wasn't used to praise that felt genuine. Not after everything that had happened. She crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. I appreciate what you've done here, but I don't think I belong in this room. These people are accomplished, connected, still working. I'm just someone who lost everything. Keanu's expression softened. Maybe that's exactly why you belong. People who've been broken understand how fragile truth really is. You can protect it better than anyone. Her voice faltered. I don't deserve this. He smiled slightly. That's why you do. The words hung between them, simple and undeniable. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Around them, the warehouse began to empty. footsteps echoing softly as the last guests drifted out. The flicker of string lights above painted soft gold across Keanu's face, giving his calm expression an almost ethereal warmth. He finally reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to her. "I was going to send this tomorrow, but I think now's the right time." Emily hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter printed on textured paper with the Voice of Truth emblem at the top. Her eyes scanned the first few lines and her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a job offer. Emily read the letter twice, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the page. The words blurred for a moment before coming into focus again. Position: Founding Editor, Voice of Truth Media. Responsibilities: Leadership and editorial integrity, mentorship for independent journalists, and establishment of ethical standards for all published works. She looked up, speechless. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real," Keanu said softly. "You don't have to answer now. I just wanted you to know that we built this with people like you in mind. People who refuse to stay silent, even when it cost them everything." Her throat tightened. "Keanu, I don't know if I can do this. I've already failed once." He shook his head. "You didn't fail. The system failed you. You were just brave enough to expose it." She looked down, gripping the paper. "But if I step back into this world and it happens again, if they try to tear me apart for doing the right thing, what then?" Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "Then you won't face it alone this time." The words hit harder than she expected. There was no pity in his tone, only quiet certainty. He continued, "I've seen people lose themselves, trying to please everyone. You did the opposite. You stayed true, even when it broke you. That's not weakness, Emily. That's leadership." She blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. "Leadership?" He nodded. "We don't need more people chasing power. We need people who tell the truth, because they can't do otherwise. That's what this space is for. You set the standard, and others will follow." She stared at him, trying to process everything. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her. "You're serious." "As serious as I've ever been," Keanu said. Something inside her shifted, part fear, part awe, part disbelief. "I've spent months trying to convince myself that my career was over," she admitted. "I thought maybe it was time to give up on this whole idea of making a difference." He smiled, eyes kind but sharp. "Maybe you were just waiting for the right stage to try again." Emily looked back at the letter. The logo at the top, the quill-shaped V, seemed to gleam faintly in the light. For a moment, she could almost imagine herself leading a newsroom again, not under the weight of lies, but surrounded by people who believed in something real. Still, the doubts crept in. "I don't know if I can carry that kind of responsibility." Keanu's voice softened even more. "You don't have to carry it. We'll carry it together. This isn't about building a company, it's about restoring faith. You've already proven you can do that." Emily felt a tear escape, landing on the paper. She didn't bother wiping it away. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked quietly. Keanu's expression didn't change. "Because I've met thousands of people in this industry, but very few who still believe the truth is sacred. You're one of them. And I don't want the world to forget your kind exists." Emily folded the letter carefully, still unable to believe it was in her hands. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. It was a door she thought had closed forever, suddenly open again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if I say yes and fail again?" Keanu took a small step closer. "Then we learn from it. That's what truth does. It survives failure." For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to breathe. She glanced around the now empty warehouse. The lights were dimmed, and workers were quietly dismantling the stage where he had spoken earlier. The banners of Voice of Truth swayed faintly above them, casting soft shadows on the concrete floor. It didn't feel like an event anymore. It felt like the start of something sacred. Keanu looked at her, his expression gentle but purposeful. This isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. What we're building will face resistance, maybe even attacks. But it'll stand because it's built on people who won't compromise. Emily's eyes glistened. You really believe that? He nodded. I've seen too much not to. There was something deeply grounding about his certainty. It wasn't dramatic, not some cinematic declaration. It was steady, the kind of conviction that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. She ran her thumb over the embossed logo on the letter again. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. She looked up at him, startled. He smiled. Not tonight. Not to me. Just to yourself. When you're ready, you'll know. For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside was still, the faint hum of city traffic, a reminder that life was continuing somewhere beyond this pocket of meaning they had found. Emily tucked the letter into her bag and exhaled slowly. You make it sound simple. It's not, Keanu replied, shaking his head. But the right thing never is. The hardest. Choices are the ones that rebuild the world quietly. She met his gaze, a tear slipping down her cheek. You really think I can do this? Keanu smiled soft, knowing. You already have. You just don't see it yet. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of respect rather than reassurance. You've spent so long standing alone. It's time to see what happens when you're not. The warmth of his words sank deep into her chest. Something inside her shifted, an invisible thread tightening a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her first day in a newsroom. She whispered, Thank you. Keanu nodded. Thank you for not giving up. As he walked away toward the back exit, his steps unhurried, Emily stood rooted to the spot. The sound of his voice still echoed softly in her mind. You won't be alone this time. She looked down at the letter one last time, tracing the emblem again before slipping it safely into her coat pocket. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening beneath the streetlights. When she stepped into the cool night air, she didn't feel defeated anymore. She felt chosen, and for once, ready to believe that maybe the truth was choosing her back. The following month felt like a quiet resurrection. The once empty warehouse had been repurposed into a modest newsroom, bare walls, mismatched desks, and secondhand computers humming with life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. A handwritten sign taped to the glass door read, Voice of Truth Media Integrity over Influence. Emily stood in the center of the room on their first morning, a cup of coffee in hand, watching as her new team trickled in one by one. They weren't polished professionals from glossy networks. They were dreamers, idealists who had left comfort behind to chase something honest. There was Noah, a 23-year-old reporter fresh out of journalism school with more passion than experience. Riley, a single mother and former local columnist who'd been laid off for refusing to run sponsored content. Miguel, a quiet but gifted data researcher who preferred truth over credit. Together, they made up a team that didn't look like much on paper, but to Emily, they were everything. Keanu had arranged the office funding quietly, never attaching his name. When the lease was signed, the landlord only knew that the deposit had come from an anonymous foundation. It was exactly how Keanu wanted it. No spotlight, no noise, just support. Emily gathered everyone near the center of the room. We're not here to compete with anyone, she said. We're here to rebuild trust. No ads. No clickbait. Just facts. Told with compassion. Noah grinned. So basically, we're doing journalism the way it used to be? Emily smiled faintly. Exactly. Their first assignment came naturally. Riley had received a tip from a local environmental activist about a development company, Briarstone Energy, that had been illegally dumping construction waste near a protected wetland. Larger outlets had ignored the story, labeling it too minor to pursue. But Emily felt that familiar tug in her gut. It wasn't about scale. It was about truth. "Let's investigate," she said. Over the next week, the small team worked tirelessly. Noah conducted interviews with nearby residents who described strange chemical smells at night. Miguel dug through public records and uncovered doctored inspection reports. Riley gathered photos that showed the waste sites stretching for miles. They didn't chase headlines, they verified facts. Every source was double-checked, every line written with care. Emily spent nights in the office, reviewing drafts until her eyes ached, the glow of her computer the only light left burning. When the article finally went live, they didn't expect much. It was uploaded to a clean, ad-free website designed by Miguel. The title was simple: Buried Secrets. How? Briarstone Energy turned a wetland into a dumping ground. Within 24 hours, it spread like wildfire. Environmental groups shared it across platforms, teachers discussed it in classrooms, and community leaders cited it in town hall meetings. The public responded not because it was sensational, but because it was sincere. Emily sat at her desk, watching the numbers climb on the analytics screen. Comments poured in from readers thanking them for bringing honesty back. One message stood out: "I stopped trusting the news years ago. Tonight, I started again." Her throat tightened as she read it aloud to the team. The room erupted in applause. For the first time since losing everything, Emily felt her heart lift. By the end of the week, Voice of Truth was no longer just a small project. It had become a symbol. Larger outlets started referencing their findings, and environmental agencies announced an investigation into Briarstone Energy. For Emily and her team, it felt surreal. They hadn't planned for fame or recognition. They had only wanted to prove that truth still mattered. On Friday evening, after another long day of follow-up interviews and fact-checking, the team gathered around a cluttered table filled with coffee cups and takeout boxes. Laughter filled the room, tired, unguarded laughter. For once, no one was worried about deadlines or politics. They were doing what they loved, for the reason that had drawn them to journalism in the first place. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway. When the door opened, everyone turned, and there he was. Keanu stood in the doorway, holding 2 large paper bags filled with food. "I heard real journalists run on noodles and caffeine," he said, smiling. The room broke into laughter as Emily stood, shaking her head in disbelief. "You didn't have to come here." "I wanted to," Keanu replied simply. He placed the bags on the table and began handing out cartons. "You've had quite a—" Noah grinned. "We're trending on 3 platforms. You're reminding people what truth sounds like." Emily sat down again, her eyes following him as he looked around the small office, the cracked floor tiles, the mismatched chairs, the team of exhausted but inspired faces. "You know," he said, "this place has something no big studio ever does. Heart." Riley raised her cup of coffee in mock salute. "To heart, then." Keanu lifted his cup too, and to courage. The team echoed the toast, their laughter echoing against the bare walls. As the evening stretched on, the room grew quieter. Keanu sat beside Emily, who watched her team chatting and eating under the dim lights. "You've built something beautiful," he said quietly. She turned to him. "You built it." He shook his head. "No, I just gave it a roof." "You gave it a voice." Emily smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, honest, unforced. "It feels like everything I lost led me here." Keanu nodded. "That's how truth works. It destroys what's false, so what's real can begin." For a long moment, they just sat in silence, watching their team laugh about headlines and typos. Outside, the city lights blinked through the windows like distant stars. Inside, something new had been born. Not an organization, but a belief. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel like a fallen journalist. She felt like a builder of trust, of hope, of truth itself. And for the first time since it all began, her smile didn't feel borrowed. It was completely her own. The celebration didn't last long. 2 weeks after the Briarstone Energy expose, Emily arrived at the office to find an envelope taped to the glass door. The letterhead read, Horizon Development's Legal Department. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal complaint. Horizon had filed a lawsuit against Voice of Truth Media for defamation, claiming their article about environmental violations had caused irreparable harm to the company's public image. Precise and threatening. By the time the rest of the team arrived, Emily was sitting at her desk with the letter spread open beside her coffee. She looked pale. Riley picked it up, reading the first lines aloud before whispering, "They're coming for us." Noah's voice cracked. "Can they even do that?" "We verified everything." Emily nodded slowly. "They can try. And they will." The room fell silent. The excitement that had filled their space only days ago dissolved into dread. They were journalists, not millionaires. They had no corporate lawyers, no protective shield. Just their integrity. And that suddenly felt fragile. By noon, emails poured in from Horizon's attorneys demanding a full retraction and public apology. If they refused, the company threatened to pursue maximum damages. Emily called an emergency meeting. The team gathered around the long wooden table, anxiety written on every face. "We did everything right," Miguel said. "We have documents, interviews, proof." Emily rubbed her temples, exhausted already. "Truth doesn't always win in court," she said. "It wins in time, but only if we survive the fight." Riley leaned forward. "We can't afford this, Emily. Even if we're right, they'll bury us in legal fees." Emily glanced toward the window, where the sunlight flickered across the Voice of Truth logo. "I know," she said softly. "That's what they're counting on." Late that evening, after the others left, she sat alone at her desk, staring at the complaint. The office was quiet, except for the hum of computers and the faint ticking of the wall clock. She felt the weight of every word pressing on her chest. Her phone buzzed. It was Keanu. "I heard about Horizon," he said. His voice, calm and steady, was a lifeline. "I'm scared," she admitted. "We can't fight them, Keanu. They'll crush us before we even get to court." There was a brief silence. Then his reply came with quiet conviction. "When they fight back, it means you're over the target." Emily closed her eyes. "That sounds noble, but it doesn't pay for lawyers." "I'll handle that part," Keanu said. "But the money won't come from me. It has to come from the people who believe in what you're doing. That's how we prove this matters." "Donations?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Let the truth fund itself. You'll be surprised how many people want to protect it." Emily swallowed. Hard. "And if no one does?" "They will," Keanu said firmly. "You've already reminded them what honesty looks like." The next morning, Emily launched a crowdfunding campaign titled Stand with Truth. The message was short and sincere. "We're being sued for doing our job. We told the truth, and now we need your help to defend it." Within hours, small donations began trickling in $5 here, 10 there. By evening, the total had reached thousands. Comments poured in from teachers, nurses, veterans, and students. "We believe in you. Don't back down. Truth deserves a fighting chance." By the end of the week, national attention found them again. Hashtags spread across social media. Number Stand with Truth and number Voice of Integrity. Independent outlets ran stories about their struggle, calling it a modern David and Goliath battle. Supporters mailed handwritten letters to the newsroom, many including small checks or encouraging notes. But for all, the encouragement, the fight took its toll. Emily barely slept. Every phone call made her heart race. She spent her days balancing meetings with lawyers, editing articles, and reassuring her team. At night, she lay awake replaying every decision, every word in the Briarstone piece, searching for flaws that weren't there. Riley began noticing the change first. "You're running on fumes," she said one afternoon as Emily stared at her computer screen. "I'm fine," Emily lied. Her voice was thin. "We can't slow down now." Miguel spoke quietly from across the room. "We're here because of you, but we need you to rest too." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Rest can wait until after the truth wins. But truth, as she was learning, demanded more than time. It demanded energy, health, and sometimes peace. A week later, Emily fainted at her desk. The team rushed to her side, and Riley helped her to the hospital. The doctor's words were gentle, but firm. Exhaustion, dehydration, stress. "If you keep pushing yourself like this," he warned, "your body will make you stop." When Keanu arrived that evening, she was sitting up in the hospital bed, her expression apologetic. "I guess I let it get to me." He pulled up a chair beside her. "You're human, Emily. Even truth needs rest." She looked at him, tears threatening. "I didn't want to let everyone down. They believe in us. They believe in me." Keanu shook his head softly. "They believe in what you stand for, and you can't carry that if you break." She closed her eyes for a moment, his words sinking in. "It's just, sometimes I forget this isn't a movie. There's no script, no guarantee of a happy ending." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but there are real people who wake up a little braver because of you. That's worth more than any ending." The next morning, she returned to the office, moving slower, but with clearer eyes. Her team greeted her with cheers and hugs. On the wall above her desk, someone had taped a note written in bold letters. "Truth isn't free, but it's worth the cost." Emily touched the paper gently, her throat tightening. For the first time, she understood what real courage felt like. Not the absence of fear, but standing tall in spite of it. Outside, the city pulsed with noise, headlines, and movement. Inside that small newsroom, truth had found its defenders, and Emily had found her purpose again. The newsroom was quieter now. After the chaos of the lawsuit and the long weeks of stress, the Voice of Truth team had returned to a fragile rhythm. They worked, they published, they pressed on. But beneath the determination lay exhaustion. Emily spent most of her evenings sitting at her desk, long after everyone had gone home. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above her as she scrolled through drafts and emails. The crowdfunding campaign had stabilized their legal defense fund, but the Pres's uncertainty still hung heavy. One wrong move could bring everything down. She rubbed her temples, fighting the dull ache that had become constant since the hospital. Her phone buzzed occasionally messages from readers, reporters, or supporters, but she couldn't bring herself to respond to most of them. The pressure of representing the truth had started to feel like a weight she could never set down. That morning, a delivery boy arrived at the office, holding a small stack of mail. Most of it was standard subscription renewals, donation forms, letters of encouragement. But one envelope stood out. It was cream-colored, sealed with a pressed floral stamp, and addressed by hand to Emily Carter, editor. She turned it over in her fingers. There was no return address. When she finally opened it, a folded piece of stationery slid out. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and slightly shaky. "Carter, I don't know if you'll remember the story about the construction collapse last year. My husband, Luis Mendoza, was one of the workers who died that day. For months, his name was dragged through the news as someone who ignored safety procedures. They made him look careless when he was the one trying to protect others." Emily's eyes widened. Her pulse quickened as she read on. "I know what you lost for telling the truth about that accident. You probably don't know what it gave back to me. Because of your reporting, the investigation reopened. They found the real cause, a faulty beam that had been hidden during inspections. Luis's name was cleared. My children know their father died a hero, not a mistake." Her hands shook. The words blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. "I can never repay you for giving my husband his dignity back. The world may not remember him, but because of you, He's remembered the right way. Please keep doing what you're doing. You are saving more than stories, you are saving people. With love and gratitude, Isabel Mendoza. By the time Emily finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion she hadn't felt in months. Relief, validation, and something deeper than either. For all the noise, the criticism, the sleepless nights, this one letter cut through it all. It was proof that the truth had consequences beyond headlines. She sat there for a long time, the world quiet except for the steady hum of the office lights. When her breath finally steadied, she reached for her phone and typed one short message: "Can you come by?" Within an hour, Keanu arrived. Keanu stepped into the office quietly, still wearing his motorcycle jacket. The rest of the team had already gone home, and the dim light from Emily's desk lamp cast a warm glow across the empty newsroom. She looked up when he entered, her eyes red from crying. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emily shook her head, managing a weak smile. "Not really, but maybe, yes. I don't know." He moved closer, pulling up a chair. "What happened?" She handed him the letter without speaking. Keanu unfolded it carefully, reading every line with the same focus he gave to a script. When he finished, he looked up at her, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, he exhaled, slowly. "This is why we started." Emily covered her mouth with one hand as tears filled her eyes again. "I forgot for a while. Between the lawsuit, the fear, the pressure, I forgot why we were doing this." He nodded. "That's easy to do when the noise gets loud. But the truth has its own kind of silence. It waits for moments like this." Emily laughed softly through her tears. She said her husband was cleared because of the article, that her kids know he died a hero. Keanu leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. "That's not just journalism, Emily. That's redemption. For him, for his family, maybe even for you." She looked down at the letter again, tracing the signature with her fingertip. "It feels strange, doesn't it? All the headlines, the interviews, the noise, and yet the thing that reminds me why I started is a single piece of paper from someone I've never met." He smiled. "Maybe that's the point. Truth doesn't need a stage. It just needs a heart willing to listen." They sat in silence for a while, both staring at the letter that had somehow become the soul of everything they'd built. Outside, rain began to tap softly against the windows, the same quiet rhythm that had followed Emily since the beginning of her journey. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier. "I want everyone to see this, to remember what this fight is really about." The next morning, she gathered the team. They stood around her desk as she read Isabel Mendoza's letter aloud. By the time she finished, no one spoke. Even Noah, usually quick with a joke, just stared at the paper in awe. Riley whispered, "She's right. This is why we do it." Emily nodded, her voice breaking slightly. "We're going to frame it, right here, where we can all see it every day." Miguel found an old picture frame in the supply closet, and together, they placed the letter inside. When they hung it on the wall above the newsroom entrance, the morning light hit the glass just right. The letter glowed softly in the sunlight, and beneath it, Riley added a handwritten note that read, "Truth isn't loud, it's lasting." As Emily looked up at it, a calm warmth filled her chest. For the first time in a long while, the doubt was gone. This was why they had started, and no matter what came next, this would be the compass that guided them forward. Weeks passed, and the framed letter became the quiet center of the newsroom. Every morning, the team would walk past it before sitting down to work. It reminded them that behind every headline was a heartbeat, and behind every truth told was someone waiting to be seen. Then, one morning, Emily arrived to find her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages flooded in from colleagues, mentors, even strangers. Riley looked up from her desk, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said, turning her laptop toward Emily. On the screen was a headline from a major national outlet: "Independent Newsroom Challenges Corporate Media. The Rise of Voice of Truth." Beneath it was a photo of their humble office and a story detailing how their grassroots effort had inspired a growing movement for ethical journalism. Emily stared, stunned. The article praised their courage, calling them a rare reminder that integrity still has a voice. By noon, more outlets picked up the story. Radio hosts mentioned them during morning segments. Bloggers wrote think pieces about their return to authentic reporting. Even some traditional journalists, people Emily once admired from afar, started reaching out privately to ask how they could help. Noah scrolled through Twitter and laughed in disbelief. "We're trending in 3 countries. Number Stand with Truth just hit 1 million shares." Emily smiled, but stayed cautious. "The attention is nice. Let's just remember why we started." That evening, Keanu stopped by. He stood quietly near the framed letter, hands in his pockets, watching the team buzz with excitement. "Looks like the world finally caught up," he said. Emily looked up from her desk. "You always said truth travels slowly." He nodded. "But it never stops." As their visibility grew, media networks began calling for interviews. Reporters wanted to know about the lawsuit, the mission, and most of all, about Keanu's involvement. He declined them all. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about the people doing the work." But Emily knew his humility was part of the story. His presence gave weight to their mission, showing that influence could serve integrity instead of eclipsing it. After weeks of persistent requests, she approached him one evening, after the team had left. "They want you to speak, not as a celebrity, but as someone who believes in what this stands for," she said gently. "You don't have to promote us. Just talk about why the truth matters." Keanu looked thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I've spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight off screen. It's quieter that way." "I know," she said, "but people listen to you, Keanu. You could help them listen to what really matters." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "1 interview. That's it." Emily's relief was instant. "That's all it'll take." The appearance was scheduled on the Late Night Exchange, one of the most watched talk shows in America. The producers wanted a flashy segment, but Keanu had only one request: "No lights on me. I want the conversation, not the spectacle." When the night came, Emily and the team gathered in the newsroom to watch the broadcast together. The office was dim except for the blue glow of the screen. Coffee cups scattered across desks as they waited. The host began warmly. "You've been called the quiet force behind the fastest-growing independent newsroom in the country. Why start something like Voice of Truth?" Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the same unassuming calm that had carried him through decades in the public eye. "It wasn't my idea," he said. "It was someone else's courage that started it. I just gave it a place to grow." The host smiled. "You're talking about Emily Carter, right? The reporter who was fired for exposing a company scandal." Keanu nodded. "She lost everything because she told the truth. Most people would have given up, but she didn't. And when I met her, I realized something: we don't lose integrity when we tell the truth. We lose it when we stay silent." The audience clapped, but Keanu didn't pause for effect. He continued, his voice even softer now. "It's easy to find good people, but hard to find honest people. When you meet one, you protect them." The room on set went still. Even through the screen, his words landed like a quiet thunder. Emily felt her throat tighten. Around her, the team sat frozen, each one knowing they were witnessing a moment that would outlive the show. The host leaned back, visibly moved. "That's powerful, Keanu. Do you think honesty still has a place in modern media?" He smiled slightly. "It has to. Without truth, stories lose their purpose, and people lose their trust. What we're trying to do isn't to change the world. It's to remind it that honesty still exists." When the interview ended, The studio audience stood, applauded. But in that small newsroom in Los Angeles, there was silence. No one clapped. They just sat in awe, absorbing the gravity of what had been said. Then Riley whispered, "He just changed everything." Noah grinned, wiping his eyes. The internet's not ready for this. He was right. By morning, the clip had gone viral. It was shared by journalists, teachers, students, activists, and even rival media anchors. Headlines appeared across the world. Keanu Reeves redefines integrity on live TV. The quote, "It's easy to find good people, but hard to find honest people. When you meet one, you protect them," spread everywhere. It was printed on posters, shared on podcasts, even painted on protest signs. Donations to Voice of Truth tripled overnight. Their inbox overflowed with messages from people around the world wanting to join or volunteer. Small news outlets in other countries began adopting the same model: reader-funded, ad-free, integrity-first journalism. When Keanu arrived at the office the next day, he found the team standing outside, holding a printed screenshot of the viral clip. Emily walked up to him, her eyes shining. "You know, this isn't just a newsroom anymore," she said. "It's a movement." Keanu looked around at the young reporters, their faces full of hope, then at the framed letter on the wall. That's what happens when truth refuses to stay small. He smiled, quiet, but proud. As the team cheered, the morning light streamed through the windows, hitting the words on the wall: integrity over influence. And for the first time, those words didn't just belong to a mission, they belonged to the world. The week after the late-night interview, Voice of Truth transformed from a rising name into a global emblem. Subscriptions poured in from every continent, and universities began citing their model as a case study in ethical journalism. But amid the growing recognition, one person stayed far from the spotlight: Keanu Reeves. While reporters from every major outlet clamored for follow-ups, Keanu quietly withdrew. He answered no calls, declined interviews, and appeared in no press photos. His only focus was ensuring that Voice of Truth stayed pure, free from the influence of fame or money. One morning, Emily received a call from their accountant. "We've had donations from around the world," he said. "But I also noticed something else. Every time a large check arrives, the sender turns out to be anonymous, but they all trace back to the same foundation." Emily knew before he said it. "The Archway Foundation?" "Yes," he confirmed. "That's Mr. Reeves's charity, isn't it?" Emily smiled softly. "Yes, but he'll never admit it." Later that afternoon, she found Keanu sitting in the small break room, sipping black coffee and reading an old paperback. "You could have told me," she said. He looked up, feigning innocence. "Told you what? That? You're the one funding the scholarships." He smiled faintly. "If people knew, it would look like charity." "It's not charity. It's an investment in truth." Emily took a seat across from him, studying his calm expression. "You redirected all the profits from the interview too, didn't you?" He shrugged. "The truth shouldn't have a price tag." His voice was quiet but absolute, as if he were stating a law of nature rather than an opinion. Emily leaned back, shaking her head in disbelief. "You realize what you've started, right? There are young journalists who can't afford tuition, and because of you, they'll get a chance to learn how to do this right." Keanu looked out the window at the fading daylight. "Then, it's worth it." She smiled gently. "You could have taken credit. You could have turned this into a brand, a movement with your name on it." He set the book down and met her eyes. "That's the problem. Everyone wants credit. But integrity isn't about recognition. It's about endurance. If the truth depends on applause, it won't survive silence." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. "You make it sound simple," he chuckled. "It is simple. It's just not easy." As the office emptied that evening, Keanu stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. Emily joined him quietly. The two of them bathed in the golden hue of the sunset reflecting off the glass. "Do you ever get tired of carrying it all so quietly?" she asked. He smiled, eyes distant. No one carries truth alone. We just keep it alive until someone else takes the torch. That night, long after everyone had gone home, Emily walked through the quiet newsroom. The hum of the computers and the faint city noise outside blended into a rhythm that felt familiar. She stopped at the framed letter from Isabel Mendoza. It glowed faintly under the overhead light, as if the words themselves were alive. Below it hung a new edition, a scholarship certificate framed beside it. In neat lettering, it read, "The Voice of Truth Journalism Fellowship, sponsored anonymously, for students who believe integrity is worth more than fame." Emily smiled, knowing exactly who the anonymous sponsor was. At that moment, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Keanu. "Meet me outside before you leave." She grabbed her coat and stepped into the cool night. The parking lot was quiet, lit only by the street lamps and the faint shimmer of the city skyline. Keanu stood beside his black motorcycle, helmet under one arm. "I thought you disappeared again," she said with a teasing smile. He grinned. "Not yet. Just making sure you're still standing." She crossed her arms. "You could have told me about the scholarships, about how much you gave." He shook his head. "That's not the point. The moment people know who funds something, they start weighing the truth against gratitude. I don't want that for you or for them." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You really don't want anything in return, do you?" He laughed softly. "If the truth stands taller than me, that's all I want." A soft breeze swept across the lot, rustling her hair. Keanu put on his helmet, but paused before pulling down the visor. "Take care of them, Emily. Make sure the next generation doesn't forget what you've built." She nodded, her throat tightening. "Where will you go?" He smiled through the glass of the visor. "Wherever the next story needs a listener." The motorcycle engine roared to life, echoing through the empty street. As he rode off into the distance, the reflection of the city lights flickered in his mirrors, red, gold, and white, like tiny truths scattered across the dark. Emily stood there until the sound faded. The quiet that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, meaningful, a silence earned through persistence. The next morning, she arrived early. The first rays of dawn cut through the window blinds as she brewed coffee and walked the aisles between the desks. The office was still asleep, but she could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the clatter of keyboards, the heartbeat of purpose that Keanu had helped revive. On her desk was a small envelope. No name, no return address, just a folded note inside. "Keep going. Truth doesn't need a stage, just a steady voice." Emily smiled and slipped it into the frame beside Isabel's letter. She whispered, "Always." When the rest of the team arrived, she gathered them for their morning meeting. "We have a new assignment," she said. "Something big, something real." Noah grinned. "Another truth to chase?" Emily nodded. "Another truth to protect." As the morning light filled the room, she glanced one last time at the two letters on the wall, the widow's words and Keanu's quiet message. They stood side by side, reminders of everything that mattered: integrity, compassion, endurance, and somewhere beyond the city skyline, a single motorcycle disappeared into the horizon, carrying with it the promise that truth would keep moving forward, quietly, but forever. 6 months later, the world had changed for Emily Carter. What began as a fragile newsroom built on faith and exhaustion had grown into an international network of independent journalists. Voice of Truth had chapters in 5 countries, mentorship programs in universities, and scholarships reaching small towns that had never seen a press room before. But for Emily, success didn't erase humility. She still arrived before dawn, made coffee for the interns, and edited articles until her eyes blurred. The framed letter from Isabel Mendoza remained on the wall, its paper slightly yellowed from sunlight but still the heart of the office. One morning, her assistant handed her a sleek white envelope. The return address bore the logo of the Global Journalism Alliance. Emily opened it slowly, her brow furrowing as she read the contents. She was being invited to deliver the keynote speech at the annual Journalism Integrity Conference in New York City. Her stomach tightened. She had spoken on small panels before, but this was different. The event was attended by the most respected reporters and editors in the world. The very people who once dismissed her as too emotional or too idealistic. She reread the letter twice, then whispered, "Why me?" When she told the team, they erupted in cheers. Noah nearly spilled his coffee. "You have to go. You're the reason half of us even believe in journalism again." Riley grinned. "Tell them what it costs to tell the truth, and why it's still worth it." Emily smiled nervously. "I'll try not to faint." The week before the conference, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those she had fought for: the workers, the families, the journalists who joined their mission. She also saw the night she lost her first job, standing alone in the rain, clutching her badge. The memories still stung, but they no longer felt like scars. They felt like proof she'd survived. When the day came, the grand ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel glimmered under chandeliers. Reporters, editors, and producers filled the seats, their badges flashing with titles from across the world. Emily stood backstage, clutching her speech notes, her palms damp with sweat. A coordinator leaned in and whispered, "You're on in 2 minutes, Miss Carter." She nodded, her heart pounding. She glanced around nervously and froze. In the back of the hall, sitting quietly near the aisle, was Keanu Reeves. No cameras surrounded him. No spotlight followed. Just him, sitting with that familiar calm, watching her with quiet encouragement. Emily felt her nerves shift into something else. A calm resolve. The kind that came from knowing you weren't alone anymore. When her name was announced, the applause echoed like thunder. She walked onto the stage, the microphone gleaming under the light, the crowd stretching endlessly before her. For a brief moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, but when she looked back toward the aisle, Keanu gave her a small nod. She took a deep breath and began. Her voice trembled slightly at first. "A few years ago, I thought my career was over. I told a story I believed was true, and I lost everything for it. My job, my reputation, my peace." The audience sat silent, listening. She paused, glancing down at her notes, but then closed them. The words were already written on her heart. "I remember standing outside my old newsroom, holding my press badge in the rain, wondering if honesty was worth it. I thought telling the truth had destroyed my life." She took another breath, steadying herself. "But someone reminded me that truth never loses it, just waits to be heard again. And when it's ready, it finds new voices to speak through." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emily smiled faintly, her confidence growing. The truth isn't loud or glamorous. It doesn't trend, it doesn't flatter. It simply endures. It's the story of a worker who died protecting his team. The story of a journalist who refused to stay silent. The story of anyone who ever chose honesty over comfort. Her voice broke slightly as she continued. "We live in a time when truth is constantly bargained with, traded or silenced. But integrity, real integrity, means standing still when the world rushes past. It means protecting what's right, even when no one's watching." From the back of the room, Keanu watched quietly. There was no pride in his eyes, no ownership, just quiet recognition. She had become everything he believed she could be. Emily looked out at the sea of faces. "If I've learned anything, it's that you don't tell the truth because it's easy. You tell it because someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe a widow trying to clear her husband's name. Maybe a young journalist wondering if it's worth the fight. You may never meet them, but your words might change their world." The audience was motionless, hanging on every syllable. She swallowed hard. "When I was fired, I thought I'd reached the end of my story. But standing here now, I see it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning." Because sometimes the truth has to break you before it rebuilds you. Her final words carried a quiet strength. I want every young reporter listening to remember this. You might lose everything for telling the truth, but in the end, you'll find yourself again, and that's something no one can take away. There was silence for a heartbeat. Then the entire room rose in a standing ovation. The sound was deafening. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked out across the crowd, faces shining, hands clapping, hearts moved. Her gaze found Keanu again. He smiled, gave a small nod, then joined the applause, blending into the crowd like any other listener. No cameras turned his way. He didn't want them to. Emily wiped her tears, unable to stop smiling. Her career, her purpose, her hope, they had all come full circle. And in that moment, she finally understood. The truth didn't just need to be told, it needed to be lived. In the months that followed Emily's speech, Voice of Truth became more than a newsroom. It became a symbol, a quiet uprising built not on outrage, but on integrity. Journalism schools began adding her keynote to their curriculums. Professors used her story to teach what they called the Carter Principle. Truth without arrogance. Courage without confrontation. From New York to Toronto, from Berlin to Tokyo, small independent outlets began appearing with familiar mottos and similar logos, a quill-shaped emblem inspired by the Voice of Truth insignia. Many of them were founded by young journalists who had once sent emails to Emily asking how to begin. In Canada, a team of students launched True North Media, covering issues in Indigenous communities with care and honesty. In Europe, a collective called The Clear Lens formed in Berlin, dedicated to fact-checking political claims without bias or noise. In Asia, Project Horizon emerged, a name chosen deliberately as a reclamation of the company that had once silenced Emily. They focused on stories of environmental reform and worker safety. Emily often said she didn't create the movement, she just lit a candle, and others carried the flame. The viral speech led to new collaborations and partnerships, but Emily and her team stayed grounded. They refused offers from corporations eager to sponsor their mission. Every time a proposal mentioned branding or exclusivity, she declined it with the same calm line: "Truth doesn't wear logos." Meanwhile, Keanu continued to work in the background. He quietly helped fund international fellowships through his foundation, allowing young reporters from low-income families to study abroad. He never announced these gestures. Sometimes the den recipients didn't even know who had helped them. Then, one afternoon, a group of independent filmmakers approached Voice of Truth with an idea. They wanted to produce a documentary about the newsroom's journey, how it began, what it stood for, and how it had reshaped modern media. Emily hesitated at first, but the filmmakers were sincere. They didn't want sensationalism. They wanted honesty. The result was a film called The Honest Ones. It premiered online without advertising, yet within days it became one of the most streamed documentaries of the year. The film chronicled Emily's rise, her fall, and her rebirth through Voice of Truth. It included footage of the team's humble workspace, clips from Keanu's late-night interview, and raw interviews with the staff about what truth meant to them. But what moved audiences most wasn't the drama, it was the quiet humanity. In one scene, Keanu was asked why he got involved in the first place. His answer was simple: because she didn't ask for help. She just kept doing what was right, even when no one was watching. That's the kind of courage that deserves a second chance. The moment went viral again. Clips flooded social media under a new phrase coined by fans: soft justice. It described the way Keanu had changed lives not through confrontation, but through calm conviction. The response to The Honest Ones was unlike anything Emily or Keanu could have imagined. Viewers around the world began sharing their own stories. Teachers who stood up against false reports. Doctors who refused to alter research results. Factory workers who exposed unsafe practices. The comment sections filled with messages like, "If they can do it quietly, maybe I can too." Universities began organizing Voice of Truth workshops. Professors quoted Emily's words about integrity, and students cited her speech and essays about ethics. A generation that had grown cynical toward news suddenly found a renewed respect for it. The film's final scene, Emily reading Isabel Mendoza's letter aloud while Keanu watched from a distance, became iconic. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was stillness captured on camera, the kind of truth that needed no music or voiceover to matter. When the documentary hit 100 million views, an interviewer from a public broadcasting station asked Emily what she thought made people connect so deeply with their story. She smiled thoughtfully before answering. Maybe because it wasn't about winning or fighting. It was about remembering. He never told me what to do. He showed me what mattered. Those words echoed across headlines and were printed in newspapers around the world. They became the heart of the film's message that leadership isn't about being followed. It's about lighting the way for others to walk freely. Even major studios and talk shows tried to feature Keanu after the film's success, but he declined all offers. When one journalist asked why he didn't capitalize on the movement, he simply said, "Because the truth doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who keeps it alive." The humility only deepened public respect. People began to see him differently, not just as an actor or philanthropist, but as a living embodiment of principle in motion. His calm voice in interviews, his refusal to take credit, his quiet generosity, all of it painted a picture of what many began calling the integrity era. Meanwhile, Emily continued her work, traveling to universities and community centers to speak about ethical journalism. She never took payment, insisting that her time was her contribution. She often told young reporters, "Courage doesn't need to roar. Sometimes it just needs to whisper and not stop." One evening, after returning from a conference in Montreal, she checked her phone and saw a new message from Keanu. It was a photo of a crowd of students in a small Philippine newsroom, holding up a banner that read, "Truth needs no stage." Her eyes filled with tears. Beneath the image, his message read, "It's working." She stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "No, Keanu, you worked. We just listened." Outside, the world moved with noise and chaos, but inside the Voice of Truth office, a steady light continued to burn, proof that honesty, no matter how soft, could still echo loud enough to change the world. And for everyone who watched, the honest ones, one truth remained unforgettable. Integrity, once awakened, never goes back to sleep. A full year had passed since The Honest Ones premiered. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something subtle had shifted, like a fog beginning to lift. Newsrooms that once prioritized outrage started rethinking their approach. Podcasts and community stations began featuring truth stories inspired by Voice of Truth. In classrooms, teachers used clips from Emily's speeches to show their students what moral courage looked like in real life. In small towns, reporters began investigating local issues with a renewed sense of dignity, no longer chasing clicks, but chasing clarity. One such story came from a high school student in Montana who exposed misuse of school funds. Another from a retired teacher in Ireland who launched a podcast interviewing everyday heroes. Across continents, people were remembering that honesty didn't need scale, it needed sincerity. Back in Los Angeles, the Voice of Truth newsroom remained modest. Their desks were still cluttered with notebooks and cold coffee cups, their lights always burning late into the night. But the walls now carried photos of their international partners' faces, smiling from different corners of the world, bound together by one shared belief. Emily often stood before those photos, reflecting on how far they had come. The framed letter from Isabel Mendoza still hung in the center, surrounded by new letters from readers, reporters, and students. It had become a wall of gratitude, a living mosaic of the change that one act of integrity had inspired. On a quiet Friday afternoon, when most of the team had already gone home for the weekend, The front door opened softly. Emily looked up from her desk, startled, but smiling when she saw who it was. Keanu Reeves stood there, his familiar calm presence filling the room like sunlight through glass. He wore a simple jacket, holding a small brown notebook in one hand. "Long time no see," Emily said warmly. He smiled. "You've been busy saving journalism." She laughed. "I don't know about saving. Maybe just keeping it honest." Keanu glanced around the room. "Looks different," he said. Emily nodded. "Bigger, but the same heart." She gestured to the wall of letters. "They remind us why we're here." He studied it for a long moment. "You built something that won't die easily." Emily's eyes softened. "We built it." He walked closer to her desk and placed the notebook in front of her. "Then you'll know what to do with this." She frowned slightly, opening it carefully. The pages were blank, except for a single line written neatly across the first page. "Truth doesn't shout, it simply stays." She read the words twice before looking up, her voice barely above a whisper. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "A reminder. The noise will always be there. But truth, real truth, stays long after people stop talking." Emily closed the notebook gently, her throat tightening. "You always know how to say the thing I didn't realize I needed to hear." Keanu smiled. "That's what good editors do." They both laughed softly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. They sat together for a while in the late afternoon light, the city outside humming faintly through the open window. It was the first real pause either of them had taken in months. Emily turned the notebook over in her hands, still tracing the single line written inside. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think truth had to be loud to make a difference, that you had to fight to be heard." Keanu looked at her with that familiar patience. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I think it just has to endure. The right people will hear it when they're ready." He nodded approvingly. "Exactly. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more endurance." They both turned toward the window where the evening sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold and amber. The newsroom was quiet, except for the faint rustle of papers on nearby desks. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel the weight of proving herself. She felt peace. Quiet, unshakable peace. Keanu stood and looked around one last time. "You've done something remarkable here, Emily. Not just for journalism, for faith. For people who stopped believing that honesty could win." She rose too, her expression full of gratitude. "You gave me the chance to prove it." He shook his head slightly. "You gave yourself that chance. I just reminded you it was still there." They walked toward the door together. At the entrance, Emily paused. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" Keanu smiled. That same gentle half-smile that seemed to hold a lifetime of understanding. "You don't need me here anymore." She looked down, trying to keep her composure. "That doesn't make it easier." "It's not supposed to be," he said quietly. "But that's how you know it mattered." He stepped outside, into the soft evening light. The sun was low, stretching long shadows across the pavement. He adjusted his jacket and glanced back at her one last time. "Keep writing," he said. "The world still needs it." Emily nodded, her voice trembling. "I will." He gave a small wave before walking toward his motorcycle, parked near the curb. As the engine started, its steady rumble broke the stillness for a moment, then softened as he pulled away down the street. Emily stood at the doorway, watching until he disappeared around the corner. The sunlight caught the chrome of his bike just before he vanished, leaving behind only the faint echo of motion and the warmth of his words. Back inside, she returned to her desk and opened the notebook again. The line on the first page seemed to glow in the fading light. "Truth doesn't shout. It simply stays." She placed it beside Isabel Mendoza's letter and whispered, "It will." Outside, the city kept moving cars, voices, headlines. and lives all weaving together in noise and rhythm. But inside that small newsroom, there was only stillness and the steady heartbeat of something that had outlived fear. Emily smiled to herself as the last light of the day filtered through the blinds. The world wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed, but it was a little more honest than before. And for her and for him, that was enough. The newsroom was quiet again, the way it always seemed to be after something meaningful ended. The computers hummed softly, the walls glowed with warm light, and the city beyond the windows pulsed with distant life. On her desk, Emily's open notebook rested beside Isabel's letter, the two symbols of everything that had begun with a single act of courage. She sat for a long time, pen in hand, unable to write. Words had always come easily to her, but now, as she looked back over the past year, they felt heavier, sacred. She thought of the people she'd met along the way, her team, her readers, and the strangers whose lives had changed. Because of one article, one truth, one choice, to stand firm. Finally, she began to write, not for publication, not for recognition, but for herself. In a world that sells comfort, truth is rebellion. But rebellion can be kind. She paused, reading the line aloud. The words felt like closure and a beginning all at once. She kept writing, her voice steady but full of emotion. We used to think justice was about noise, about protest and power. But sometimes justice whispers. Sometimes it's a person choosing not to lie, even when silence would be safer. The pen glided across the page as she continued. I once believed that telling the truth would end my career. I thought honesty and survival couldn't coexist, but I was wrong. Because truth, real truth, doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. It brings light to places that forgot what warmth feels like. She smiled faintly, remembering Keanu's quiet advice, his unwavering belief in doing what was right without needing to be seen. He showed me that integrity doesn't need applause. It just needs endurance. The strength to keep showing up, to keep writing, to keep believing that honesty matters, even when the world forgets. The room seemed to grow stiller, as if listening. On her screen, photos of their global chapters flickered in a slideshow. Faces of young reporters from every continent filled the display. Students holding microphones, villagers being interviewed, volunteers fact-checking stories in tiny community offices. Each one represented a small rebellion of honesty against apathy. Emily closed her notebook and whispered to the empty room, "This is what truth looks like." In her mind, the story of the past year unfolded like a film. Keanu's quiet acts of kindness replayed the night he told her she wouldn't be alone, the way he refused to take credit, the simple gift of a notebook filled with silence and one perfect line. She thought about the subway rides he'd taken among ordinary people, his quiet donations that no one discovered until years later, the small gestures that had somehow built a legacy louder than fame. And she realized something profound, that the purest justice wasn't loud and it wasn't glamorous. It was human. It was someone refusing to lie when it would be easier to. She wrote one last line. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply telling the truth and letting it stay. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, cutting through the newsroom's early stillness. Emily stood by the wall of letters again, coffee in hand, watching as the light touched each frame. The widow's note, Keanu's message, the student essays, and thank you cards from readers all shimmered faintly. Together, they told a story, one that didn't belong to her alone, but to everyone who had chosen truth over convenience. The door opened, and Riley stepped in, holding her camera. "You're here early again," she said with a smile. Laugh softly. "Old habits." Riley looked around. "You ever stop to realize what this place means to people?" Emily shook her head. "It's not about what it means to them. It's about what it reminds us to be. They shared a quiet moment, standing side by side, taking in the space that had once been just a dream. Then Riley pointed to the notebook on Emily's desk. "That from him?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, his final edit." Riley smiled. "He always did prefer quiet endings." Emily turned the notebook over in her hands, tracing the words again. "Truth doesn't shout. It simply stays," she whispered. And it does. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed and the day drew to a close, the newsroom filled with the faint sound of piano music playing softly from a nearby radio. The melody was simple, almost wistful. On the screen above Emily's desk, a short film montage played clips from their work over the past year. Students in classrooms quoting her speech. Journalists in faraway cities standing up to power. Families thanking them for restoring trust in their stories. Each image carried the same heartbeat of truth. Small, persistent, alive. As the music swelled, the montage shifted to moments of Keanu's life. Him, sitting quietly on the subway, offering his seat to a stranger, stopping to sign a fan's letter with genuine warmth, visiting a children's hospital late at night without cameras, smiling humbly after giving away another check no one had asked for. The images faded into a single closing line on the screen. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's just someone refusing to lie. Emily sat back, her eyes glistening. She whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the world moved as it always had, noisy, unpredictable, complicated, but somewhere within it, small acts of honesty continued to ripple outward, making everything just a little more human. The music faded into silence. The camera lingered on the notebook one last time. The final line, glowing faintly in the light. "Truth doesn't shout. It simply stays." Then, a quiet voice spoke over the closing frame. "If you believe honesty still matters, share this story. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever told the truth, even when it cost you something?" The screen faded to black, leaving only the echo of a piano note and the feeling that somehow the world had become a little bit brighter.